You're in the Air, 1938. The sound isn't a roar, it's a confident, steady hum. You're sitting not on a cramped bench, but in a plush, reclining seat. A stewardess in a crisp uniform offers you a hot meal. Below, the American landscape slides by at an astonishing 190 miles an hour. This isn't just travel, it's the future. This is the Douglas DC-3. It's the aircraft that made airlines profitable, that shrunk a continent, that proved air travel could be reliable, comfortable, and above all, normal. You feel the smooth bulkhead, the polished metal of the door latch. It's a masterpiece of engineering, designed by Donald Douglas to be the peak of civilian transport. By 1939, it carries over 90% of America's air traffic. It is, quite simply, the king of the skies. Then, a radio crackle cuts through the cabin's quiet comfort. December 7, 1941. A broadcast from Hawaii. The hum of the engines is suddenly drowned out by the scream of dive bombers and the thunder of naval guns. The king of the skies is about to be drafted. Suddenly, the polished metal doesn't matter. The reclining seats are a liability. The future isn't about comfort anymore. It's about survival. Welcome to the invisible front, where every statistic tells a story, and every cargo manifest holds a whisper from a world at war. Ever wonder what it truly felt like to see a luxury airliner, the symbol of peacetime progress, get ripped apart and rebuilt into the single most important supply vehicle of the Second World War? So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you find the journey we're about to take is a valuable one. Invite viewers to share where they are watching from and which invisible piece of technology or logistics fascinates them the most. Now, let's pull back the curtain and uncover the story of the systems that win wars. You are standing in a procurement office at the Pentagon. The maps on the wall are bleeding red. France has fallen. Britain is besieged. The Atlantic is a graveyard thanks to the U-boat wolf packs. The fundamental problem of this new global war isn't just fighting, it's reaching the fight. You can have the world's best tanks, the most ammunition, the finest soldiers, but they are utterly worthless if they're stuck in a port in New York or at the bottom of the ocean. The war is global, spanning oceans and continents, deserts and jungles. You need to move men and material faster than ships can sink and further than trucks can drive. What you need is an air truck, a flying freight car. You look back at the plans for the DC-3. It's elegant, it's comfortable, it's complicated. It's designed to carry 21 passengers, not a Jeep. Its doors are too small for cargo pallets. Its floor is too weak for heavy engines. But it has one thing no other aircraft on Earth can claim. It's reliable. Its Wright Cyclone or Pratt & Whitney Twin Wasp engines are already legendary. Its pilots say it can land on a dime and flies itself. It's a proven off-the-shelf design, and you have thousands of pilots who already know how to fly it. There is simply no time to invent something new. The war will not wait. So the order comes down, not from a corporate boardroom, but from a war room. Take this airliner, strip it, gut it, remake it. The comfortable seats? Throw them out. The soundproofing? Gone. The polished interior? Rip it out. The small passenger door? It's not big enough. You need something that can swallow a field gun. The luxury icon is dead. You're watching the birth of a legend. The civilian mask is pulled away, revealing the rugged, brutalist core of a warrior. The DC-3 is about to become something else entirely. You're on the factory floor, Santa Monica, California. The air, once smelling of precision-tooled aluminum and clean upholstery, now stinks of welding smoke, hydraulic fluid, and green zinc chromate primer. The gentle tap-tap-tap of pre-war assembly has been replaced by the deafening, frantic brrrap-bap-bap of thousands of rivet guns, a sound that echoes 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You see them, the Rosies, swarming over the unfinished skeletons of aircraft. their hands and faces smeared with grease. They are building the Sky Train, and they are building it against the clock. This isn't a conversion anymore. It's a metamorphosis, a brutalist reimagining. You watch as a team rips out the lightweight passenger floor, the one designed for high heels and briefcases. In its place, they wrestle with thick metal beams, riveting in a reinforced cargo floor. You can practically feel the new strength under your feet, a floor that can absorb the shock of a 2.5-ton truck or a 75mm pack howitzer dropped into its belly. Then you see the most critical change. A worker with a cutting torch walks up to the elegant curved fuselage, the hallmark of the DC-3's design, and carves a massive, rectangular hole in its left side. The sleek aerodynamic lines are sacrificed for pure, blunt utility. In this gaping wound, they mount two massive, outward-swinging doors. The clamshell. This is the C-47's magic trick. With those doors open, the aircraft's entire interior volume is exposed. You no longer load it, you ingest cargo. A preloaded jeep, a field ambulance, or crates of ammunition can be driven straight up a ramp and into the fuselage. Look inside. The soundproofing is gone, the polished walls are gone. It's just a hollow green-painted tube, the ribs of the airframe exposed like the skeleton of a whale. Along the walls, you see them, simple, folding metal benches. They aren't designed for comfort, they're designed for density. 28 men, knee to knee, fully loaded with parachutes, rifles, and 100 pounds of gear. This is no longer a DC-3. This is the C-47 Sky Train, C for cargo. The sheer scale of it is staggering. Before the war, Donald Douglas built around 600 DC-3s. By 1945, his factories, and others under license, will have churned out over 10,000 C-47s. It's an industrial miracle, a testament to the power of the good enough philosophy. Hollywood loves to show you the glamorous fighters, the P-51s, and Spitfires. But for every fighter pilot in the sky, there were dozens of men and women on the ground, just as vital, building the logistics train that made victory possible. And here's the reality check that history often forgets. The C-47 was not the best cargo plane. The Germans were building the gargantuan Messerschmitt Me 323 Gigant, which could swallow a tank. The Americans themselves were developing the C-46 Commando, which was bigger and could fly higher. But the C-47 had something none of them could match. It was available, it was reliable, and it was simple. Its Pratt & Whitney twin Wasp engines were the most dependable radial engines ever built. You could fix them with a wrench and a prayer. Its pilots quickly learned that the Goonie Bird, as they nicknamed it, could take off from a patch of desert sand, a strip of muddy grass, or a road cleared of rubble. It was an industrial workhorse, not a thoroughbred. It was the system that valued quantity and reliability over exquisite, unproven performance. The Sky Trains are rolling off the assembly line, one every few hours. They are no longer polished silver. They are painted in the dull olive drab of war. The transformation is complete. The luxury airliner is now a beast of burden, and it is about to be sent to the most unforgiving, terrifying, and vital aerial supply route of the entire war. The olive drab paint is barely dry as your C-47 is loaded onto a transport ship or flown in grueling stages across oceans. You've left the familiar skies of California for a world that is suffocatingly hot, humid, and hostile. You're at an airfield in Assam, in northeastern India. The air is a thick, wet blanket. Around you, men are loading your aircraft. Not with soldiers, but with barrels of gasoline, crates of .30 caliber ammunition, K-Rations, and vital medical supplies. Your destination, Kunming, China. The problem? Between you and Kunming lies a 500-mile-long, jagged and utterly unforgiving wall of rock, the Himalayas. This is the hump. The Japanese Imperial Army has steamrolled through Burma, capturing the port of Rangoon, and, most critically, cutting the legendary Burma Road. That winding 117-mile artery was the only land route for supplying Chiang Kai-shek's armies. Now, China is isolated, suffocating, and on the verge of collapse. The only way to keep 300 million people in the fight is to fly over the rooftop of the world. You climb into the cockpit. The metal seat is hot and damp. You run through the pre-flight check, the engines coughing to life in a cloud of blue-black smoke. You take off, the overloaded C-47 clawing for altitude. You pass 10,000 feet, then 12,000. The air grows cold, and you reach for your oxygen mask. It smells of stale rubber and ozone. You put it on, feeling the artificial hiss of air. This aircraft was designed for comfortable, low-altitude passenger flights. It has no pressurization, no heating. You are now a high-altitude mountaineer in a 13-ton uninsulated metal tube. At 18,000 feet, the world outside the canopy becomes a nightmare. The wind howls at over 100 miles per hour, a relentless, invisible river that slams your aircraft. Suddenly, the C-47 plummets. Your stomach leaps into your throat as you're thrown violently against your seat harness. It's an air pocket, a downdraft so powerful it can fling a plane thousands of feet in seconds. You and your co-pilot wrestle with the yokes, your knuckles white, fighting to regain control. Then, the ice. The temperature is 40 below zero. You watch, horrified, as a thick, milky white crust begins to grow on the leading edges of the wings, destroying your lift. A crackle on the radio. It's not static. It's a strained, terrified voice. "Bandits! Oscars! 7 o'clock high!" You are a flying truck fat with fuel, and you are being hunted by the swift, deadly Japanese Ki-43 Oscar fighters. You have no guns, no armor to speak of. Your only defense is to bank hard and plunge into the very cumulonimbus cloud that is trying to rip your wings off. This is the reality of the air truck. The C-46 Commando was technically the better plane for this job. It was pressurized, had a higher service ceiling. But it was new, its engines were unreliable, and it earned the grim nickname the Flying Coffin. But the Goonie Bird, your old, reliable, good-enough C-47, just kept flying. It flew through ice, wind, and enemy fire that would have torn a lesser machine apart. You look down through a rare break in the clouds. In a rocky pass below, you see a glint of sunlight on metal. Then another, and another. It's the aluminum trail. It is the graveyard of C-47s that didn't make it, a 500-mile-long, glistening scar of wreckage that marks the only path to China. For every 1,000 tons of supplies delivered, 1 pilot and 3 aircraft were lost. Yet you land in Kunming, your body numb with cold, your hands aching. The fuel is unloaded. The ammunition is rushed to the front. You've done it. You and this repurposed airliner have become the defiant artery of a world at war. And the C-47's education, written in blood and ice, was just getting started. You leave the icy peaks of the Himalayas behind. Your new home is an airfield in North Africa. The air is no longer thin and freezing. It's thick, dry, and smells of dust and diesel. The date is July 9th, 1943, night. You're in the pilot seat of your C-47, one of hundreds lined up on the dark runway, engines idling in a low, thunderous rumble that you feel in your chest. Your cargo is different now. It's not gasoline or rations. Look behind you. The hollow green tube of the fuselage is packed shoulder to shoulder with 28 men of the 82nd Airborne Division. They are silent, their faces smeared with camo paint, their eyes wide in the dim red glow of the cabin light. They are weighed down by parachutes, rifles, grenades, and the almost unbearable tension of what's to come. This is Operation Husky, the invasion of Sicily. And your C-47 is no longer just a truck. Tonight, it is an assault vehicle. You take off, climbing into the darkness, joining a vast, unwieldy armada of over 200 other sky trains. This is the first large-scale nighttime airborne invasion ever attempted by the Allies, and you can feel the inexperience. The formation is loose, pilots struggling to keep visual contact. Your navigator is wrestling with new, unfamiliar radar sets, trying to find a coastline in the dark. Then you see it, the coast of Sicily. But something is terribly wrong. A searchlight, then another, stabs the night. You're not over the drop zone, you're over the invasion fleet itself. Suddenly, the sky erupts. Tracers, red and white, scream past your canopy. The air around you is filled with black puffs of smoke as naval anti-aircraft guns, your guns, friendly guns, open up on your formation. The C-47 shudders violently as a shell explodes nearby, the shrapnel pang-pang-panging against your fuselage like a giant steel drum. You hear shouting from the cabin. The nervous gunners below, rattled by earlier Luftwaffe attacks, have mistaken their own airborne invasion for another enemy bombing run. It is a massacre. You watch in horror as the C-47 to your right takes a direct hit. It blossoms into a silent, expanding orange fireball, the men inside gone in an instant. Another plane, its wing sheared off, begins a sickening, silent corkscrew down into the black water. The radio is a chaos of screaming. Inside your cabin, the red light flicks to green. Go! 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 The paratroopers, desperate to escape the flying coffin, hurl themselves into the flak-filled night. You bank hard, turning your battered plane back toward Africa, your hands shaking, the smell of cordite filling the cockpit. The mission is a disaster. Of the 2,000 paratroopers dropped, hundreds are lost. They are scattered over 60 miles of Sicilian countryside. Some land in the sea and drown. Some drop directly onto German machine gun nests. This was the C-47's harsh lesson. The plane itself, the Goonie bird, had been magnificent. It absorbed incredible punishment. It was a tough, reliable machine. But the system around it, the navigation, the pilot training, the crucial coordination between the Army and the Navy, had failed catastrophically. Sicily wasn't a failure of the machine, it was a failure of the doctrine. It was a brutal, bloody, and agonizing rehearsal. And you, the pilot who survived, just learned in the most terrible way possible what not to do. It was a lesson you would have to perfect, and fast. Because the next drop wouldn't just be for an island, it would be for the world. It is the night of June 5th, 1944. You are back in the pilot's seat, gripping the yoke. The airfield in England is a hive of controlled, grimly determined activity. The air thrums with a sound so deep, it's more of a vibration than a noise. The sound of nearly 900 C-47 sky trains, engines idling, ready to launch the largest airborne assault in the history of warfare. This is Operation Overlord. The chaotic panic of Sicily feels like a lifetime ago. That was a bloody rehearsal. This is the main event. You can see the lessons learned everywhere. Your flight path is not a hopeful guess. It's a precise, non-stop ribbon of green lights stretching across the dark English countryside. A corridor in the sky. Your navigator isn't just relying on maps and stars. Bolted to his station is a new piece of technology, the Rebecca receiver. It's a small, unimpressive box, but it is the key to this entire night. You look back into the fuselage. The 28 seats are not full. Tonight you carry only 18 men. They are from the 101st Airborne. Their faces are blackened with burnt cork. They are loaded with an absurd amount of equipment, radios, collapsible antennas, and strange, tripod-mounted lights. These are the Pathfinders. They are the surgical strike answer to the operational disaster of Sicily. They are the tip of the spear for the entire invasion. Your mission, in one of the lead C-47s, is not to drop an army. Your mission is to drop the men who will guide the army. You take off, joining the immense stream of aircraft. It is a river of steel, flowing at 500-foot intervals, stretching for over 300 miles. You cross the black, choppy water of the English Channel. Then you see it, the Cotentin Peninsula, Normandy. Almost immediately, the German flak opens up. It is a solid wall of fire. Unlike the panicked, sporadic friendly fire over Sicily, this is accurate, purposeful, and terrifying. The sky is filled with black blossoms and incandescent red tracers that seem to float lazily toward you before zipping past your canopy with a sharp crack. You hold the aircraft steady. You cannot jink. You cannot deviate. You are trusting the system. Your navigator shouts over the intercom, his voice tense with triumph. "I've got it! Eureka! Dead ahead!" On the ground in a field chosen by French resistance fighters, a small team has activated a Eureka transmitter beacon. Your Rebecca set is now homing in on its electronic pulse, a lifeline pulling you through the storm of flak. This is the precision Sicily lacked. You are low, just 700 feet and fast. The flak hammers your fuselage, the sound like 1,000 steel fists trying to beat their way in. You see C-47s on either side of you, engines trailing fire, beginning their long, slow spiral into the dark. But you hold on. The red light in the cabin turns green. Go! The Pathfinders are gone in seconds, vanishing into the darkness, a handful of men against an entire German army, carrying the fate of the invasion in their radio packs. You bank hard, your empty C-47 climbing away as you head for home. Behind you, the sky is now filled with the main event. Following your electronic breadcrumbs, the full armada of 822 C-47s arrives, a perfectly timed 9-plane-wide column dropping 13,000 paratroopers onto the DZs your Pathfinders are now frantically marking with lights and beacons. The C-47, the humble Goonie bird, has just acted as the spearhead for D-Day. It was not just a transport, it was a bridge, a precision instrument of invasion that placed the first vital soldiers on the ground. The D-Day drop is a fading, adrenaline-soaked memory. It is now weeks later, August 1944. You are standing on a makeshift runway just inland from the Normandy beaches. It's not a paved airfield, it's a captured hayfield, bulldozed flat, with a runway made of pierced steel planking. The metal clangs and clunks under the wheels of your C-47 as you taxi for yet another takeoff. The air smells of cut grass, high-octane aviation fuel, and diesel exhaust. General George S. Patton's Third Army is on the move. He has broken out of the hedgerow country and is racing across France, a steel juggernaut chewing up dozens of miles a day. He is advancing so fast, his own supply lines, the famous Red Ball Express, are stretched to the breaking point. The German army in its retreat had methodically destroyed every port and railway in France. Cherbourg is a ruin. The bridges over the Seine are gone. Patton's tanks are literally running out of gas. This is the moment the C-47 Skytrain transforms from a specialized assault craft into a full-blown aerial freight train. Your C-47 is no longer configured for paratroopers. The static lines are stowed. The hollow fuselage is now a cavern of pure utility. You watch the ground crews roll 5-gallon jerry cans of gasoline into the belly of your plane, one after another, until the floor is a solid mass of red, odorous metal. You are a flying gas station. Alongside the fuel, they load crates of 105mm artillery shells, belts of 50-caliber ammunition, spare tank treads, and cardboard boxes, simply marked K-Rations. You take off climbing over the wreckage of Normandy and fly low over the French countryside. This isn't a high-stakes, flak-filled run like D-Day. This is a milk run, a commute. But it is the most important commute in the world. You land on another bumpy field miles ahead of the main supply depots, where desperate quartermasters are waiting. Your cargo is unloaded in minutes, the fuel siphoned directly into the tanks of Sherman tanks that are sitting silent on the side of a road. An hour later, those tanks are back in the fight, pushing the front line another mile east. This is the Third Army Express, an unending conveyor belt in the sky. Troop Carrier Command, the organization behind this miracle, is flying thousands of sorties a day. And then you see the C-47's other, greater purpose. The cargo is out. Now the flight nurses, in their drab fatigues, begin to load your return cargo. It's not fuel. It's not bullets. It's stretchers. The same floor that held artillery shells now holds wounded men, fresh from an aid station. You look back at them, their faces pale, many wrapped in bloody bandages. The air in the cabin changes. The smell of gasoline is replaced by the sharp metallic tang of blood and antiseptic. You take off, your touch on the yoke now infinitely more gentle, climbing to a smooth altitude, avoiding any sudden banks. In less than 2 hours, these men will be in a full surgical hospital back in England. This is CaseVac, or casualty evacuation. Before the C-47, the journey for a wounded man was a multi-day, bone-jolting ambulance ride over ruined roads. Many didn't survive the trip. Now, your repurposed airliner is delivering them to life-saving surgery. It is a dual-purpose miracle. It carries the means of war in one direction and the hope of survival in the other. This is the system at its most brilliant, its most humane. It is the Goonie bird, earning a new name, the flying ambulance. It's an ideological weapon. You are proving that your industrial system can not only kill more efficiently, but save more efficiently. The war is over. 1945. You walk through a boneyard in the Arizona desert. The air is still, and the only sound is the tink, tink, tink of metal contracting in the heat. As far as you can see, there are C-47s, parked wingtip to wingtip, their olive drab paint fading under the relentless sun. Their windows are blank, their tires are flat. The great aerial freight train has been decommissioned. You see many being sold for pennies on the dollar, snapped up by fledgling airlines, by bush pilots, by scrap merchants. The world is done with war, and it seems to be done with the Goonie bird. It's a relic, a tool of a history everyone is desperate to forget. Fast forward. June 1948. You are in Berlin. The city is a hollowed-out skeleton, still in ruins from the war. But now, it is the epicenter of a new, colder conflict. The Soviet Union has blockaded the city, cutting off all road, rail, and canal access. 2 million people, your former enemies, are now your hostages, and they are trapped. They will starve. They will freeze. The maps are on the wall again. The problem is the same as it was in China. How do you supply a city from the air? The call goes out. From the boneyards, from the tiny cargo airlines, from air forces around the world, the C-47s are called back. They are obsolete. They are slow. They are tiny compared to the new 4-engine C-54 Skymasters that will be the mission's true workhorses. But you, the Allies, need every hull you can get. You climb back into that familiar cockpit. The smell of hydraulic fluid and old canvas is the same. The Goonie bird has been called to service one last time. You're flying into Tempelhof Airport. You are in a corridor, a 20-mile-wide strip of air, and you are part of a system so precise it's terrifying. You do not talk to air traffic control. You just listen. You are a single cog in a massive, unending aerial conveyor belt. Every 90 seconds a plane lands. You have one chance to land. If you miss your approach, you do not go around. You fly your empty plane all the way back to West Germany. There is no room for error. You land, the wheels screeching on the tarmac. Before your propellers even stop spinning, German ground crews, thin and hungry, are sprinting toward your plane. You've brought 3.5 tons of coal. The plane behind you 90 seconds later has flour. The one behind that, medicine. The one behind that, chocolate. You see the children standing by the fences. They don't wave in fear. They wave in hope. You see pilots attach handkerchief parachutes to candy bars and drop them into the ruined city, the Rosnan bomber, the Raisin bombers. This is the C-47's final and perhaps greatest triumph. This is ideological collapse in action. You are defeating an enemy not with bombs, but with logistics. The Soviet Union, with its mass tanks just miles away, can only watch, impotent. They can't shoot you down without starting World War III. They can only watch as your good-enough democratic industrial system, personified by this old, repurposed airliner, feeds its former enemy. You are proving that your system can build, supply, and sustain life in a way theirs cannot. The Berlin airlift is the C-47's graduation. It began as a luxury toy. It was forged in the factories as a tool. It was tested over the hump. It was bloodied over Sicily. It was the spearhead of D-Day. It was the ambulance of Kasevak. And here, in the skies over a ruined Berlin, it becomes a symbol of hope. It cemented the legacy of the accidental weapon, the weapon that was never designed for war, but which became the single most decisive piece of logistics in the sky. The engines finally fall silent. The last of the coal dust is swept from the cargo bay. The great aerial conveyor belt of the Berlin airlift has won the first battle of the Cold War, and the C-47, the Goonie bird, the sky train, can finally truly rest. Or perhaps not. Even today you can find them. In the brutal cold of the Alaskan bush, in the high deserts of Bolivia, in the jungles of Africa, you can still hear that unmistakable steady drone of the twin Wasp engines. The repurposed airliner from 1935 is still at work, still hauling cargo, still reliable, still good enough. When you see one in a museum tucked away behind a glamorous fighter, you'll know. You're not just looking at an old plane, you are looking at the invisible front. You are looking at a system, an idea, that proved logistics, the unglamorous, unseen, and underrated power of supply, is the force that truly shapes the world.